After the death of Fujiwara no Nakamura, Dōkyō, the minister's Zen master, became a prominent figure at the imperial court. He was a mysterious figure. No definitive details about his life, such as when and where he was born, are known. What is known is that he was a descendant of the Yuchi clan, a branch of the Mananabi clan. He is also said to have been born in Kawachi province. As he grew up, he became a believer in Buddhism and practiced asceticism. He then became a monk, offering prayers and treatment to sick members of the imperial family. He gained the trust of retired Empress Koken after curing her illness. After she ascended to the throne again as Empress Shōtoku, he became her favorite and was promoted to a central political position. In other words, the Emperor of Japan was a nun and the ministers were monks. Thus began an unprecedented pro-Buddhist government. The first thing Empress Shōtoku's government did was to repeal the policies implemented by the previous government official, Fujiwara no Nakamura. First, the Tang-style job titles that he had introduced were abolished and reverted to traditional Japanese names. The influence of the perpetual private ownership of newly cultivated land law that he had promoted was weakened, and private land reclamation was once again restricted. However, the trend towards land reclamation that was already underway could not be stopped. Even after restrictions on cultivation were imposed, nobility and ministers continued to reserve cultivated land for their own private property, and so the foundations of the manor system were formed. However, this problem reoccurred when Empress Shōtoku ascended to the throne again. It was a question of imperial succession. She remained single her whole life and had no children. So the issue of imperial succession remained unresolved at that time. Naturally, the nobility attention was focused on who would be the next emperor of Japan. Each clan sought to support a person who would be favorable to them as emperor of Japan. As a result, factions gradually formed over the succession to the throne. However, Empress Shōtoku was also keenly aware of these developments. She issued an order that no attempt should be made to set up a prince on one's own merits. The issue of imperial succession was put on hold. However, this order alone was not enough to stop the nobility actions. Imperial succession continued to be a major issue throughout Empress Shōtoku's reign. As the issue of imperial succession was being debated, attention was naturally drawn to Emperor of Japan Genin, who was ousted from the Emperor of Japan. Although he was stripped of Emperor of Japan by Empress Shōtoku and exiled to Awaji Island, he was still alive. I cannot accept Empress Shōtoku's accession to the throne. Emperor of Japan Genin should ascend to the throne again. People who thought this way began to support him. This was not a good situation for Empress Shōtoku. She claimed that Emperor of Japan Genin was a traitor who rebelled against the imperial court along with Fujiwara no Nakamura. And she gave orders forbidding the people from assembling together with him. Under these circumstances, he died mysteriously. Therefore, it is highly likely that Empress Shōtoku secretly instructed someone to assassinate him. Around the same time as his death, Dōkyō was rapidly promoted. When Empress Shōtoku imperial visited Ki province, he stopped off in his hometown of Kawachi province. At the time, she said, "Dōkyō is my teacher and he always protects and helps me. Moreover, he is a man of compassion for the people and well suited to serve the imperial court. He will be able to perform his duties as Daiho Gaijin. But he will decline it. Therefore, I will appoint him as Grand Minister and Zen Master instead." Thus, he was promoted to the unusual position of Grand Minister and Zen Master. Furthermore, later on, it was reported that what was believed to be a Buddha's relics, or the remains of Buddha, had appeared at a temple in Dōkyō. Empress Shōtoku claimed that this was the Buddha's will. She then made Dōkyō a Dharma king equivalent to the Emperor of Japan. She wanted to use Buddhism to govern the country. So she decided to leave Buddhist policy in his hands. However, it was extremely unusual to give a monk who was not of the imperial family a title including the word king. Naturally, the nobility were strongly opposed to his rapid promotion. As such, the politics of Empress Shōtoku in Dōkyō did not have the support of the nobility. One of the major factors behind this was, of course, the issue of imperial succession. Empress Shōtoku, who was elderly and childless, was also concerned about who should become the next emperor of Japan. And then, she actually began to wish for Dōkyō to ascend to the throne. However, it was clear that the nobility would strongly oppose the idea of having someone who was not a member of the imperial family succeed to the throne. Thus, a conflict arose between Empress Shōtoku, who wanted Dōkyō to ascend to the throne, and the nobility who opposed this. Then an incident occurred that brought this conflict to the surface. This is the Hachiman Oracle incident. This incident began when a person who was performing religious rites in Daifu informed Empress Shōtoku that he had received a revelation from the gods at Hachiman. This is the announcement. Place Dōkyō on the throne. By doing so, the world will be at peace. This was a convenient oracle for Empress Shōtoku, who wanted Dōkyō to ascend to the throne. It is unclear whether this oracle was spontaneous or whether she had some influence over it. However, as if to reinforce this, she said that she had also received a revelation from God in a dream. She claimed that God had told her to send a messenger because he had something to tell me. However, since many of the nobility were opposed to Dōkyō's ascension to the throne, the selection of the envoys had to be done carefully. Thus, Wake no Kiyomuro was selected as the emissary to be sent to Hachiman. Since he was from a rural area, Empress Shōtoku probably thought this way. Because he comes from the provinces, he will not be influenced by the opinions of the central nobility. However, in reality her assumption was wrong, and he too was opposed to Dōkyō's ascension to the throne. Thus, he was ordered to go to Hachiman and confirm the oracle once again. He then resolved to thwart Empress Shōtoku's plan. He stated that God who appeared before him at Hachiman said, "A member of the imperial family should succeed to the throne. No one who is not a descendant of the emperor may ascend to the throne. Eliminate such people immediately." He returned to Dōkyō and told her that the god had said so. However, Empress Shōtoku and Dōkyō were infuriated by what he said. Empress Shōtoku determined that his report was a lie. She gave him the degrading name Wake no Kiyomuro. Furthermore, she exiled him to Azumi province. However, even she could not withstand the silent pressure from the nobility who used God's prophecy. Thus, she was forced to give up her plan to have Dōkyō ascend the throne. As a result, the opinions of the nobility who opposed Dōkyō's accession to the throne prevailed. However, the issue of imperial succession remained unresolved. The future was completely unclear. Even in such a situation, time did not stop. Finally, death came to Empress Shōtoku as well. Her health deteriorated in her later years and she never recovered. She gradually found it difficult to carry out her government duties. And then she just passed away. In the end, Empress Shōtoku passed away before the issue of imperial succession could be resolved. Following her death, an emergency meeting of the nobility was held. The following people attended this meeting: the minister of the left, Fujiwara no Nagate; the minister of the right, Kibi no Makibi; 3 councillors.
There were a total of 6 participants, including Fujiwara no Kojimaru. Naturally, the main topic of discussion was who should be the next emperor of Japan.
First, Kibi no Makibi recommended Prince Chinu, the grandson of Emperor Tenmu. This is because the Prince Kusakabe and Prince Tonri lines have fallen out of favor. He thought he needed to open up a new lineage. However, Fujiwara Shikika was opposed to this.
Let's look at the participants in the meeting. Among the Fujiwara clan, there were 2 people from Shikika there. Also, Isanokami no Yakatsugu was a cousin of Fujiwara no Tsukunamuro. In other words, half of them were in a position close to Shikika.
The Shikika group worked with Fujiwara no Nagate from Haki to take the lead in the conference. And they were against Kibi no Makibi. Prince Chinu has 13 children. There is a high possibility that a dispute over the succession to the throne will arise. They made this claim and opposed the accession of Prince Chinu to the throne. As a result, Kibi no Makibi was left with nothing to say. Furthermore, Prince Chinu himself refused to ascend to the throne, so in the end someone else had to be chosen as Emperor of Japan. The new candidate was Prince Shirakabe, who belonged to the lineage of Emperor Tenchi, not Emperor Tenmu Emperor Tenji. He was the oldest member of the imperial family and was involved in politics as Dainagon at the time. However, this was a major decision as it meant the imperial line would be transferred to the line of Emperor Tenji rather than Emperor Tenmu. This caused contention at the meeting and made it difficult to reach a decision. At that time, Fujiwara no Momokawa of Shikika came forward and said, "I am actually in possession of the will of Empress Shōtoku." He claimed that Empress Shōtoku wanted Prince Shirakabe to become the crown prince. Although this will was likely a forgery, it confirmed the accession of Prince Shirakabe to the throne. He was to ascend the throne as Emperor Koni. one person who was forgotten here was Dōkyō. When Empress Shōtoku, who had been his favorite, died, the criticism of him that had been suppressed suddenly erupted. This criticism led people to believe that he had been secretly plotting to take over the world for many years. He was appointed as the head priest of Shimosuke Yakushiji, which effectively resulted in him being exiled. On the other hand, Wake no Kiyomuro, which had fallen from grace in the USA Hachiman Oracle incident, has been reinstated. 2 years after his exile, Dōkyō died in Shimosuke province, where he was posted. Although he had once come close to becoming emperor, he was buried quietly without any special treatment.